So I went back and I quit my job. And I decided I was going to begin producing for Broadway. And that was my new business that I created a company. And I reached back to some people from my past that I had worked with, and I sat down with somebody and said, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And she said, I'm super interested. And that very day, she wrote me a check for $500,000 to start my business.
Welcome, Badass Manifester. I am so glad you are here. I'm your host and head coach, Ashley Gordon, master mindset and manifestation biz expert, founder of the quantum coaching certification, and multiple six-figure entrepreneur obsessed with empowering you to create quantum leaps in your energy, your life, and your business. This is the show to help you make magic your everyday normal, where the ripple effect is real and the guest experts are world class. My mission is to power your conscious and subconscious mind with manifestation teachings, business tools, and coaching techniques to put your potential into action. Consider this your weekly up level. Are you ready for quantum transformation? Let's do this. Welcome back, Badass Manifester. I'm so excited for today's episode. We have such an incredible guest today. Someone that we have never had on the show before, sharing a skill and a tool that can literally change your business and your life. I can't wait for you to dive into it. I want to introduce Nick Demos. Nick Demos is multifaceted, multi-talented. He has over a decade of teaching meditation and yoga, and he has 25 years experience as a Broadway producer, a filmmaker, and a writer. He won a Tony Award for a Broadway show. I won't give it away. You have to listen. And he now is so passionate about helping entrepreneurs unleash their potential and share their stories with the world and craft their stories so that they can impact others. And we all have a story within us. We all have a message to share. And he, in this episode, is going to give you tips and tricks to help pull that out of you so that you can connect with people that are following you on a deeper level, connect with the people in your life on a deeper level, and really impact others with your story. And I mean, I know how powerful storytelling is. You guys probably listened. I shared my story for my birthday episode, my life story in 33 minutes. And at the end of the episode, I literally said everyone needs to somehow share their story. So I know today's episode is going to inspire you, and I can't wait to hear what you think. So make sure you tag us as you listen and enjoy today's episode.
I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
First and foremost. And I tell not only my own stories, but I help entrepreneurs tell their stories, their personal brand stories, so they can connect with their audiences, they can convert to sales, and they can create the impact that they want to make in the world. Because when you use your story, when you use it, and it's an effective story, people know you faster. They like you better.
They like you faster too.
They like you faster.
Yeah, they know you faster. They like you faster.
And they trust you faster, right?
Yeah.
And so really that's really what it's all about.
So cool. It's funny because that concept, and we'll talk about like your journey of how you got here, but like the concept of storytelling when I first started my business was like so foreign to me. It was so foreign because I was very much the type of person that's very like conceptual and like up in the clouds. Yeah. And so I remember Jen actually doing a live video, Jen Casey, about storytelling. And I was like, I know I have stories, but I don't know what they are. Like, It's actually really challenging for people to extract their stories. They don't know. I think a lot of people discredit their stories. There's so much we can get into. There's so much.
All of this. So, and I, you know, if we go through my sort of journey, I'll tell stories, which will help then that I can reference.
Tell me all the stories. Okay, cool. So share like how you How, like, what? I know you have an amazing story, so just share it. Share it with us.
Okay. So, wow, where to begin, right? Like
It's a loaded.
my mother my mother says that I was always a storyteller. That when I was a little boy, I would hop up onto the table and I would recite all of the nursery rhymes. Like I memorized them and I performed them at such an early age. And eventually that led to dance classes and voice lessons and acting classes. And I became a professional actor at 16. I was really like so fortunate to have like this amazing experience working with phenomenal people. And by 19 years old, I left school, I moved to the Big Apple to New York to be a Broadway dancer. And that was really my first career, was in that kind of dance and storytelling. Well, fast forward a few years, and here I am at 26 years old doing the Radio City Music Hall Christmas Spectacular with the Rockettes. And I had this moment where I was on stage, and in the show, you are asked to wear a bear costume. There's this Nutcracker ballet, and I was in a bear costume. And I'm jumping off of a trampoline off of the side of the stage. I'm doing this big leap, and I land on the stage. At Radio City, it's such a, if you've ever seen the show, it's like this huge, like, production, right? There's so many people, so many moving parts. And there's a number grid on the floor, and you have to be on your number or you could crash into somebody, right? So I've got this bear head on and I can barely see, and I'm looking for my number and I can't find my number and I can't find my number, and I'm like freaking the F out, and tears start rolling down my cheeks inside the bear head. And I had this moment where I got off stage, I took my bear head off, and I remember looking in the mirror and saying, this is not your life. This is not the life you want to live. And I knew then that my dance career needed to be over. I was always the person who was looking at the light, looking at the sound, going, what? That doesn't sound quite right. That light's not good. That costume sucks. And I realized I needed to be the one telling stories rather than being told where to stand and how to do it.
Whoa, instead of acting out the story, you needed to be telling the story.
I needed to be the origin. I needed to be creating them.
Wow. Isn't that amazing how you discovered that from a place of like extreme like misalignment in that moment of just like, this is not it. Like, it's just unbelievable.
I talk about this a lot with my students, in that my whole life has been defined by misalignment.
Whoa.
It has not been defined by the crowning achievement moments.
Yeah.
Those never feel like you think they're going to feel. It's sort of like, oh, I was on the Radio City Christmas Spectacular. This is a great job to have. I was dancing with the Rockettes. Before that, I had been dancing with Aretha Franklin. I'd had like this great dance career, and it never felt right to me. I was living somebody else's life.
That gave me the chills. I think a lot of people can relate to living someone else's life and not realizing it until you have that big moment of, oh shit. Really?
Yeah, and that oh shit, like in the dressing room when I took that bear head off, the oh shit was, oh, I have to really step up now.
Right. What am I going to do about it?
What am I going to do about it? And I got super old school, and I got on the phone, like dial, picked up the phone and called every place I'd ever worked at, every theater I'd ever worked at. And I just declared it. And I said, I'm directing and choreographing now. And I need work.
Talk about a pivot, okay? Wow.
Yeah, I always say my career is also defined by not only pivot, it's pivot, kickball change with some jazz hands. Right?
That's amazing.
I go for it.
I'm the same way though. Like when some people have a really hard time with those pivots, but it's really like it's a decision and you make it and you own it and you step into it, and it can feel hard, but it can also just be simple.
Absolutely. And it definitely was not like, oh, this is so easy, right? It
Yeah.
really was in that moment were super emotional. But I also knew that staying where I was not the answer. And I knew that that was actually going to be harder than taking the step and the journey.
Yeah.
And on one of the people that I called said, oh my gosh, we just lost our choreographer. Will you come to Florida and choreograph this production of Godspell? So 2 months later, I set out and began my next career, which led me to, within 1 year, being a full-time director choreographer, which was really insane, which then led me to another place in my life of running a $1 million business. I was hired to run a theater company. I had no experience at it. I had no idea what I was doing, but they fired the artistic director of the theater in Oklahoma City while I was there. And the president of the board turned to me and said, hey, we love your shows. You've done great work. Would you consider running the theater for a year while we do a national search to find a replacement? And I was like, 28 years old. This is $1 million business. No idea what I'm doing. And I said, absolutely.
Yes. I love that so much. You just went for
because
it.
what I felt in that moment was that I would learn.
Yeah, you would figure it out.
I'd figure it out. There's nothing I can't figure out.
Yeah.
Right? I will call somebody and ask for help. But I'll make it happen.
It's so interesting because as you're talking and sharing and telling your story, it's like, I know that there's people listening and they're just like, but how, right? Like, how did he do that? How did he make those decisions? How did he just go for it? How did he think? How did he believe in himself, right? And I want to just point out for those how thinkers right now that it's not about the how. You got to let that go. Because you didn't know how.
I had no idea how to do any of these things. What I did know was that I had resources. What I did know was that there were people around me that did have some know-how, and that I could pick up that phone again and ask for help. I wasn't ever afraid to say, I don't know how to do this. That was something I think that was taught to me or instilled in me by my parents, maybe. I'm not really sure. Yeah. But, or maybe it's just innate, I'm not sure. But that I did know, because there were days where I was scared shitless. Excuse my French. Do we swear here?
We fucking swear here.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Right, guys?
I figured badass, we're good. Yeah. You know, there were days where I was scared, where I knew that but I just kept going. And I just kept saying, put one foot in front of the next, and you're going to see how this works out.
Where did it lead you?
So where did this go, right? So a year later, they said to me, we don't want anybody else. We want you to take over this theater. And I was able to grow the theater.
I knew that was coming.
You felt it.
Yeah.
I was able to grow the theater from about $1 million budget a year to about a $4 million budget a year, a staff of 6 people to 45. And so I really was able to scale that business. But I began to get restless. I'm about 8 years in now. And I went to a teacher training for yoga. The whole time I was this spiritual seeker. I was reading books. I was attending Marianne Williamson events. I was like, digging in, but didn't have a real practice. And I was like, I want a practice, because I was in Oklahoma City at this time, right? And there were only 2 yoga classes a day there.
Oh my God.
At that time. One at 9 a.m. and one at 5. It was like the Real Housewives of Oklahoma City. That's me practicing yoga.
And you loved it.
And I did love it, actually. It was really fun. But I also wanted to deepen that spiritual well. And I knew that the practice was part of that, a deep practice. So took a month off, went to yoga teacher training back in New York. I'm in New York, I'm in a meditation, in training, I'm sitting there, and another one of those moments happened. And in the meditation, what came to me was, you don't need to take a month off. You don't even need to go to yoga teacher training. You need to quit your job.
Whoa.
And
And
here it was,
you're
like,
not expecting that, were you?
no, no, it was not. And in my head, I was like, my mother's going to kill me. My mother's going to kill me. Because my parents, I think, really were like, oh my gosh, here you are in this industry that's so up and down, and
Yeah.
you've got this steadiness. You've
Mm-hmm.
got this steady, you've got the real paycheck, you've got a real job, right? Because all these years before, I was a freelancer, I was an entrepreneur, always
Right.
that entrepreneur spirit, right? So I went back and I quit my job.
Oh my.
And I decided I was going to begin producing for Broadway. And that was my new business, that I created a company. And I reached back to some people from my past that I had worked with, and I sat down with somebody and said, "Hey, here's what I'm going to do." And she said, "I'm super interested." And that very day, she wrote me a check for $500,000 to start my business.
Holy shit. That's incredible.
It was from a long relationship,
Right.
it's from development of that, but she also was just super. It was just like the right person at the right moment,
That was
right?
like your alignment. It wasn't one
It
of
was
those misalignment moments. That was a good
That
one.
was not a misalignment moment. That was like a full on alignment moment that just everything sort of came together. And so I did. And that final year, I gave them a year notice in Oklahoma.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because it takes about a year to find a replacement for that kind of position. Uh, and I was producing a show in London's West End. I was developing a show in New York. I was running the theater. I was flying around the world that year. It
That's
was
amazing.
a crazy, crazy year of my life. Um, and a year later, one of the shows that I was working on that I helped develop and was a part of the producing team was a show called Memphis.
Mm.
And we won the Tony in 2010. So a year later, we won the Tony.
What? Okay, you guys. Nick went from being a dancer on Broadway to a producer Tony Award winner on Broadway.
All insane, right? That's
Oh
so
my
insane.
God, that's just so amazing. Like, that's just so awesome. And
But
Memphis is a huge show.
yeah, it was a huge hit. We ran for 5 years.
Yeah,
It was a big hit.
yeah.
And but the interesting thing that happened there was at the Tony Awards. This was another one of those misalignment moments. I'm at the Tony Awards, and there's this perfect CBS still of the moment that CBS captured of the broadcast when they announced the Tony. Bernadette Peters announced the winner, and it was Memphis, and the producing team stood up like cheering and screaming, and my face is completely blank. And it's weird because I remember that moment, and I can't believe it was caught like in a still, because I remember that moment. And in that moment, what went through my brain was, wow, this is it. This is how this happens. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. Because my entire life, I'd wanted a Tony Award. My entire life, I've been working towards this moment. And here I was, not even 40 yet. I was like just trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do now?
I have like the chills all over my body. Like it's so intense.
And that was when the real work began,
Right.
spiritually. Like, that's when I had to really dig in and be like, what do you want to do? How do you want to serve the world for the rest of your life? Because this was not it. You thought this was it. You could go chase this dream again. And yes, telling stories is a part of me, but this wasn't the way that I felt that I could best serve. And in that moment, I knew that my entire life was going to change the next day. Now, I was also thrilled. I have a trophy, and I have a great trophy. And also, I knew that the show was going to run, so I knew my investors were going to get their money back. I knew that that person that had invested in me was going to like make money. Like I knew a lot that
A lot
day.
of good
That
things.
was a lot of good things. So it was like this real bittersweet moment of, but all of that happened in that moment.
I have a question about that moment. So, was there anything in that moment that felt like it was surreal? Like, were you like, is this real? Like, is this really happening? Like, did it feel like it was really happening?
I felt completely out of body,
Okay. Yeah.
completely. As I'm like, you're like walking up onto the stage. It was like, it's like slow motion almost. Like, like
You
it's
went
like,
on the
like,
stage. You went on the stage.
yeah, to get the award,
Oh my,
And so I'm like, oh, yeah, oh, wow, this is really happening.
whoa. Okay.
And yet I knew that my whole life had to change after that.
Hmm. It's just so interesting how I think a lot of people everyone has a different definition of success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to know what yours is because,
Preach.
yeah, like what you think it might be, it might not be.
Yeah, I also say that a lot with my students and clients. Define your success. What
Mm,
does it really look like to you? Because it's a state of being.
correct. Yeah, I feel that.
And that state, sometimes it comes in through alignment and sometimes through misalignment, right? But
Right.
extending that state of being over time rather than it being the moment.
Right. Yes. Like all the moments,
All the moments.
the moments strung together. Yeah. Mm. So after that, after you won the Tony,
Mm-hmm.
and you said you knew that your whole life had to change. Did you know how to change it? Did you
I
know?
had
Yeah.
no idea. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do, other than because I had this hit show, I
Mhm.
knew that checks would be coming in the mail. So I
Great.
knew that I had time to explore. And I began to go back to my directing bit. I expanded. I uh, directed a short film about Alzheimer's that won a couple of awards, which was awesome. I got to do the film circuit. Then I started working on these documentary films. I fell in love with this idea of documentary,
Love documentary.
which I now have two that are in post production, two films that are in post production that I've directed and produced. But I just began to explore. And one part of that exploration was then obviously digging deep into the spiritual practices, like I said, and I began to teach more yoga, meditation, and creativity and
Mm.
storytelling.
Hmm.
And that really led me to where I am now, which is teaching people to use story for their personal brands. Because all this time I've been a personal brand, right? And all this time I've been a storyteller. And all this time I've been a spiritual seeker.
So this is perfect.
And so it just all sort of came together.
Yeah, as it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, do you find how much fulfillment do you find in helping other people tap into their stories?
Woo! Like, uh, it is truly what I've meant to do. It's interesting that I had really thought that it was to tell stories exclusively, but really what I've learned it's that to be of service to help others step out of the shadows
Mm.
and step into their greatness, into their fullness, into their story and own their stories and helping them along the way, guiding them. That is, it's so powerful. It's everything.
Do you find yourself really leading people through like their most vulnerable states? Because a lot of our stories are like very personal.
Yeah, they are. It's interesting because I hear a lot from people, well, I'm not sure I can tell that story. And
Yeah,
I say, yet,
right.
yet. And you shouldn't start with that story,
Hmm.
right? Like, don't start with the big stories. You don't need to tell your deepest, darkest secrets. In fact,
Yeah.
you're the people that are personal brands, uh, maybe your audience isn't even really ready or want to hear that. right? They don't necessarily want to hear your deepest, darkest secrets. Start small. Start with the daily things, little things.
Little things that people overlook that they don't think are worth telling.
Totally. I can tell the story of going to the grocery store
Yeah.
and standing in line. And the other day, this actually happened. I stood in line at the grocery store and a woman got out a checkbook and started to write a check. And I was like, the patience in me went through the roof. Like I had no patience for it. I was like, what the hell is she doing? What year is this? And yet here I am, somebody who teaches people to like calm down, calm your nervous system. It was like a practice what you preach moment. But the point of that is that is so relatable. Everyone has that moment of impatience. Tell that kind of story to your audience to start rather than the deepest, darkest secret.
Yeah, 100%. I want to dive into this with you so much, but I just want to acknowledge your journey because it's just such a beautiful story. It really is. And it's a journey that you've been on and just where it's brought you and the work that you're doing now. It's so impactful. It's so meaningful. And I hope that I know that you do. I know that you feel really good about that, but thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for asking, honestly. And I do feel good about where I've come. Along that path, I also want to say that we hit the successes there. There were a lot of quote unquote failures.
Yeah.
For every one of those successes, I also had shows that failed. I also had projects that failed. And we love to talk
that didn't get paid.
Yeah, we love to talk about the successes and not actually honor that those quote unquote failures were actually the things that led me to those successes. So I think that's really important that people that are listening to this are like, well, I haven't had that kind of success, but I had twice as many failures in order to get those successes. It's really about risk. It's about putting yourself out there.
Which so many people are afraid to do.
Yeah.
I was terrified. It was my biggest thing. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be shamed. I didn't want to be, I just cared so much what people thought about me and my message and what I had to say and how it came across and how I presented myself and like so many limiting beliefs around it. So yeah, I feel you on that.
Which is why you're a brilliant coach.
Thank you.
Because you know the path.
Totally.
You got the light that you can shine.
One of my favorite songs to explain entrepreneurship is the Avicii song that's Wake Me Up. And in the beginning, it's like, feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I feel like that line is just, I've said this so many times, but it's so true. It's like, we don't know where we're going, but we know where we're starting with just what's in our heart. And that's what we got.
P.S. You have a great voice.
Oh, thanks.
Do you sing?
No. I mean, to myself, like
karaoke.
When I was little, Nick, I was actually the lead in all the school plays.
That does not surprise me at all.
I was Dorothy. I was Peter Pan. Nobody probably knows this. I was Seidel. I was Nancy and Oliver.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
You got a theater bug up, yeah?
I did. Yeah, back in the day.
Love it.
So, okay. I want to dive into the storytelling more if we can, because
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people really want to hear this and like are so interested in it. So what are your like best tips? Like, where do we start with storytelling?
Yeah, the first thing is truly just to start. That sounds like so, but it's actually true. It's that you learn by doing, just like anything else.
Messy action.
Learn messy action. You have to take the action. That's number one, because that's the number one mistake people are making. It's just not doing it.
So as I can attest to this, because I remember years ago, Jen Casey said something about storytelling. And I was like, I know I have stories, but I don't know what they are. And I didn't have an ideal client at the time. And I was just like totally winging it, messy action. And I ended up telling a story that I never told about my ex-boyfriend and what I learned from that relationship and how toxic it was. And I went into details of the story. I never had so much engagement It was crazy. People were like, oh my God, I feel like this is my story. Like they totally related to it. And then I totally understood what she meant by like actually using your story.
Yes. And they do.
Yeah.
They connect to you, right? They're going to connect to you through that action, through telling of the story. And there of course there's structure that you can get into of how a story is structured: first act, second act, third act, rising action, falling action, all of that. But when you're first starting, don't worry about any of that. Truly, just begin. Now, some people say to me, I don't have any ideas. I don't know. I don't have stories. And
Yeah.
again, I say to you, the story is in how you fold your laundry, how you work with your kids, how you play with your kids, what your coworker is doing, what your client said to you. There are so many stories in every single moment of your life. Create a little folder and just start throwing stories in there, throwing ideas in there, so that if the well is dry, you go to that folder and you're like, oh yeah, that story right there, and relate it to your business. Here's the other second mistake that people make, is they don't actually relate it to what they're offering. They just tell random stories.
Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. Random stories are beautiful, and yes, people might get to know you, but it's a bit like throwing spaghetti against a wall and hoping something will stick. It doesn't.
It doesn't. I love that you said that because I actually learned that in a weird way from my yoga training. Did you go through yoga training?
I did. I'm 500 ERYT
Oh,
trained
wow. Okay.
yogi.
Have you ever heard of Baptiste yoga?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of that is what I'm trained in. And like they teach us in Baptiste yoga to not be as conceptual, but to like speak into the body, right? So like instead of saying, throw your hands up to the sky, to the stars in the sky, right? It's like, no, stretch your fingertips to the ceiling and reach for like the dots on the ceiling, like specificity. And it's interesting how I've used that training. It's like weird how I've like used that into my storytelling of just like being very, very specific with what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Without overdoing. It's this balance, right? So you'll notice that when I was telling my story, I chose a couple of moments, a couple of key moments. The bare head and the tears coming down. That's a specific moment that people will remember.
Yeah.
What will people remember? Or
you're going to be like, oh, I love that podcast with the bear head guy.
Yes, exactly. Or the Tony Award moment where where you said, oh, I got chills. That's the goal. If somebody's going to get chills from it, that's what they're going to remember. So you want to have a moment or two like that. We say in the theater, we say each act, first act, second act, there's an intermission in between. You need to have a shocking or a surprise moment. And if each act doesn't have one, that means the play needs work. So you have like these moments of like, when the audience does that, you've got them.
You've got them.
And it's the same when you're telling your stories, especially if you're crafting like what you just heard of mine, which is basically my origin story, right? If you're crafting a story like that, you really need those moments. In the little stories, of course, if you're doing a little story on social, you may not always have a moment, right? But you do need something that will grab their attention, especially on social, because everyone's like so fast and furious.
I completely agree. And it's interesting too, because I think people will probably, like it's in the theater, you have that feedback of the audience as opposed to like a Facebook live video where you're like, when you're first starting to tell your story or put yourself out there, I know I was like, do I have them?
Right.
Are they really listening?
I'll tell you how you know. You add a call to action.
Yeah.
When you have a call to action, you know if they've listened or not because they're going to respond.
Yeah.
Some of my stories land. Let me tell you this. I've been doing it for how many years, and some of my stories they land, boom, and like you'll see the comment. Sometimes I do a story and it's a thud.
Yep.
And it's just like in going back to Broadway, just like Broadway, only 20% of Broadway shows succeed. 80% are failures. So I allow myself that when I'm creating my stories here as well.
Mm.
80% of them can fail. I only need 20% of them to succeed in order to draw in the clients.
Oh, yeah. So just let yourself off the hook, everyone.
Yeah.
Practice your storytelling.
Allow yourself to fail.
Allow yourself to fail.
And
Yeah,
I like to reframe it, of course, it's not a failure, but as like that learning opportunity.
totally. I mean, when I told my story about my ex-boyfriend at that time, there was nowhere to go with it really. Like, but I've learned, like you said, to pull it into your business, to pull it into what you're offering or giving. I always tell my clients, like, give your people the nugget back. Like, it's not just about what you learned and your experience. Like, what's the nugget for them? What's in it for them?
And that is also the biggest lesson, is that it's not about you, boo. It's not about you. It's
Not
about them. You
Also
are
a yoga concept, right? Like it's not about you
totally,
teaching, it's about them on the mat.
you're the guide.
Mhm.
Don't make yourself the heroine of the story. Make them the heroine and you their guide.
Yeah. And that's an art, right? Like learning how to, tailor your story. That's a craft, that's an art.
Yeah.
To give them like the most amazing nugget. Like even just like you in the grocery store and the patients. It's like, so when have you been in a situation where you needed to have more patience, and how did you cultivate that, and just kind of giving
Yes.
that bigger picture question at the end, I think is really powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that will also get the engagement that you want,
Right.
which then draws them in, which then sets them up to purchase from you ultimately.
Right. Ultimately. Yeah. And also when you were saying like, oh, this is my origin story, everyone should really, your homework is to write an origin story. Like, do you tell people to write it out or just to like speak it out?
I tell them to, if they feel like, some people are like, I'm not a writer, I don't like to write. So I'm like, grab your phone, press record, and talk it,
Mm-hmm.
and then write it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there's so many different places and ways in which you can use it. You
So
can
many
use it.
variations,
There's
right?
so many variations, and also I tell it differently every time because it needs to feel fresh, right? I don't want to tell the exact rote story, on here versus somewhere else. It's got to be real. It's got to be in the moment, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And like there might be times where you want to go back even further or you want to start sooner, right?
Right.
Like you might have started just at the Tony Award and then we could
Right.
like it just depends on where you want to go with it. Like I have so many stories that I like one story that I use, but I use it for all these different things. Like the same story I used to launch QCA was like about coaching, but I used it to launch a money program too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
but
Yes.
in a different way, like molding it in a different way. All true, all accurate, right? Like, but just used differently.
Which is why I do for the homework. Your homework is
Yeah.
to go and really talk it out or write it out from the very beginning, because what you're going to find is that this actually relates to this in my life, and this relates, oh my gosh, this actually makes more sense to me, actually, why I do what I do now. Because knowing your why is the most important.
Mm.
Everyone wants to know your why. They want to follow the person that knows their why.
What's your why?
That's so fun. My why is that I truly believe that everybody's story is important
Mm. Felt that.
and that voices need to be heard.
Mm. Yes, that landed. Fully landed. It is so powerful to know that. Mm. So good. What else? What else do people need to know about their stories?
Let me think. What else do they need to know? I really want to go back to that idea of making it not about you,
Yeah.
because I think this is also a huge mistake that I see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to call the customer is the heroine or the hero of the story. When you may call it your ideal customer or avatar, or you may, whatever you want to call it, I like to call it the heroine,
Yeah.
because they are the important person. And if you are the person that struggles with telling your story, if that's like, oh, I don't want to, I really can't, don't make it about you, make it about them. Stories can also be not only everyday little things, but it can also be your client's success. That's a story.
Yes.
Using those testimonials, that's a story, and crafting them and using them in a way that works with your copy, for instance, is fantastic. Like there are ways to use story beyond your personal story. And even when you do use your personal story, always position yourself as the guide.
I love that. And I think that's a beautiful point to make about, even if you feel like you don't have a story, being able to use your clients as stories, testimonials as stories, because so many times people have said to me, how do you think of all this content? Like, how do you have all this content? And I say, I honestly get my content from my clients. Like I get all my content from my clients. And when people are talking and sharing in groups or whatever, I'll say, that's a post. That's a live. That's a podcast. Like I'll just like let them know exactly.
Yeah, I write it down I write these things down when I'm like in a session with people. I write them down on little Post-its and I just post them all over the place. There's content, there's content, there's content. And then I also do something called an idea download, where I really believe in flow writing. Sit down, free form flow writing without agenda. No agenda. If you need to ask yourself a question at the top, ask yourself a question. It's stream of consciousness writing. You just write and write and write. If you can't think of anything to write, say, I can't think of anything to write. I can't think of anything to write. I can't think of anything to write. And then eventually things start to flow. And then what I do is I go back to that writing and I circle things that are interesting. Oh, that could be something that my audience needs to hear. Because if you're writing it, and if it's coming out of you, somebody else needs to hear it.
Yeah. Whoa, I love that idea. I want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to do that. I love automatic writing. I'm sure you've
Yes, it's very similar. It's very, very similar.
And there's times where there's nothing coming through, but then there's times where I hear all the messages and I'm just like,
yes. And that's exactly basically what Flow Pages is. It's a form of automatic writing. But what I do is I go back to it and I circle the things and then I take them and I download it into a list. So I call it my idea download list. And then that goes in that folder that I was telling you about. So that you've got all of this content that actually came from you.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
It's just a process way.
It's a great process. I would highly recommend you guys trying that. I'm definitely going to do that as part of my homework. And I think the other question that's coming through about like using clients as a story, we don't mean like, oh, I just got off a coaching call with Nick and he was struggling with this and that. And, he had a major breakthrough, but
no, we don't.
Right, exactly. So can you share how you mold that for someone?
Yeah. So what I tend to do is take 2 stories and combine them, or 3 stories and combine them and create a fictional version of them. Take the archetypes, take the type and then embellish details or shift details so that it's not Ashley's story, here we go, right? That it really becomes a fictional character, but that is all resonant because it's from truth.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Because you'll find, as you know, and that there are commonalities amongst all of us, and there's patterns. And the longer you're coaching and the longer you're teaching, the more you see the patterns in people. And so you can use those patterns because those things come up over and over and over again. I'm not good enough. Those themes come up over and over and over again. And your client struggles become in very specific sort of categories. And so you can dive into those categories using combinations of the stories.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Yes. Do that. So I have to ask you, because I ask everyone that comes on, Nick, what makes you a badass manifester?
Belief. belief and vision. And it's like sort of like the Tony Award thing. I always knew it would happen.
Wow.
I had no idea how. So surrendering to the how, because it's not my job to know the how, but holding the belief of what's possible.
That's it. Anything is possible when you hold that belief. And I love that you shared that, because I think that that's the one thing that stops people the most is they want to start their business. They want to share their story. They want to do all these amazing things, and they're moving towards it, and then they go back, and then they move towards it, and then they go back. And it's like, if they could only you have to hold that vision and belief.
Hold the space for yourself.
Yeah.
That you would for somebody else. That you would for that 8-year-old version of yourself.
Wow. Where can everyone connect with you and stalk you out?
So I'm on all the socials at the Nick Demas. Nick Demas was oddly taken, believe it or not. TheNickDemas.com, and on Instagram and the Facebook.
The face page.
The face page, all those places at the Nick Demas. And on my podcast, the Creative Soulpreneur podcast, which I can't wait for you to come on as well.
Thank you. The Creative Soulpreneur podcast.
Correct.
I'll link it all up. I'm so grateful. This was so incredible. Thank you.
I am so honored you had me. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys. Go tag us, because we want to hear how much you love this episode, what stood out to you the most, what resonated with you, what landed with you. And we'll be chatting you up in the DMs. Can't wait. Woo! We did some work today. Thank you so much for listening. You know I love my BAM fam. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who you know would love it too, because we live for the ripple effect over here. And how can you best support the show? Make sure you're subscribed, hit the 5 stars, and leave a review on iTunes, and let me know how the podcast has impacted you. I love being part of your real-time journey, so screenshot the episode and tag me and my guests on Instagram at ManifestWithAsh. Now say it with me. I am my own power source. I am the master of my own energy, and I deserve everything that I desire. We don't just talk about it over here. We be about it. Now go get 'em.